presented by Netting Pros. Netting Pros specializes in the design, fabrication, and installation of custom netting and padding for your college baseball programs all around the country. Next time your field or facility needs something new, whether that be netting, wall padding, L screens, or ball carts, make sure you check out our good friends at Netting Pros. So thrilled to be doing this again, year 3. I am your host, Michael Patrick Rooney, and thanks to the guys at Netting Pros. So cool to see them at the convention this year, and they have been the sponsor every year, so it's really cool. So here's what we're doing. Sunday Night Conversations these are college baseball discussions, and we always hear from the main head coaches in college baseball. So this has been a fun way for me to have discussions with the guys that I'm sure the main head coaches in college baseball are wonderful. I'm sure they would like to talk to the media less. They would like less time in front of microphones. So here you are, guys. We're doing you a favor. So I wanted to do some fun themes this year, and this might be the most fun of the themes we thought of. So these 3 gentlemen, we've got Mike Clement, the hitting coach at Ole Miss. We've got Ross Kivett, the hitting coach at Houston, and we've got Blair Debord, who's got like a 17-word title at Mizzou. He is the Associate AD for Development and Strategic Initiatives, which means that is hashtag you're a very
college admin for you right there.
So great. So what these 3 gentlemen have in common is that they were members of the 2013 Kansas State team that won the Big 12. And, why is that a big deal? Kansas State had not won a conference championship in baseball since 1933. So that was an 80-year gap. The Big 12 has always been a power conference in baseball, but I actually pulled up the standings. I mean, you're talking about Kansas State that year. These guys won the league by 3 games. And it's Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, West Virginia, Baylor coming off a really nice run, Kansas, TCU, who was about to go to 4 straight Omahas. Texas Tech was about to go on their big run. Tim Tadlock had just gotten there. And, Texas was coached by Augie Garrido at the time. And obviously we know the caliber of that program. So, just an incredible season. So these are, and it's not just that team. These 3 guys have done some incredible things in their career ever since then. So, boys, it's great to have you. Here's what I want to do. Clem, I'm going to start with you. If you guys don't mind, just, take us, I want you to introduce yourself kind of in this context. How did you get to this Kansas State program and team? So take us from where you grew up to, Clem, your intro will be a little bit longer here because obviously you were coaching at the time, but take us from where you grew up and how you ended up at Kansas State.
Yeah, quickly. Grew up in Marshalltown, Iowa. So Midwest guy. Played junior college baseball, on to Division II baseball, both in the state of Iowa. Found out really early, like as a 10-year-old in the backyard. I had a 6-year-old brother that played in the big league. So at 10, I found out that I was going to coach because my brother was way better than me. And so I started thinking about coaching at that point. My coaching career, at least at the Division I level, started at UTSA in San Antonio. Was fortunate to be there at the right time and was there for 4 years, won a couple Southland Conference championships and had a great run. From there, I was the volunteer assistant at Texas A&M for 3 years. Was fortunate to be there with Rob Childress and Justin Seeley, Matt Deggs, Andy Sawyers. Went to Omaha in 2011. We had a great run there. And then after the 12 season, Coach Hill at Kansas State hired me to be the hitting coach at Kansas State. So that 13 season was my first season at Kansas State. Walked into a pretty good situation. I won't get into what may be your next question about our club and all of that, but that's my brief bio.
So let me fill in that, Clem. So your brother obviously is Jeff Clement, was a first-round pick. The only thing I can remember your brother doing wrong was he picked the wrong school coming out of high school. He went to USC instead of Arizona State. But we forgive and we don't forget, but we do forgive. And your dad needs to be mentioned. Your dad, Brad, was a incredible coach in his own right, CEO of Perfect Game. So your dad was a high school coach for how many years, Clem?
I think he was the head coach at Marshalltown High School for 13 or 14 years, was an assistant prior to that, but won 3 state championships, is in the Iowa High School Baseball Coaches Association Hall of Fame. And we don't need to give him more kudos than he needs, but he was a legendary high school coach in the state of Iowa for sure.
And who was your boss at UTSA? Who was the head coach at the time?
The head coach there was Sherman Corbett. So Coach Corbett was a left-handed pitcher, pitched in the big leagues with the Angels, played at Texas A&M, assistant was Jason Marshall, who ended up becoming the head coach at UTSA. Great run there. It was awesome.
That's great. Blair, you go next. Where you grew up and how you ended up at Kansas State.
Sure. Well, I'm actually from Manhattan, Kansas originally. So I grew up in Manhattan, Kansas, going to football and basketball, baseball, like anything at the university. And a lot of our summers, I mean, really every summer, basically from when I was 8 years old, we would go up to Rosenblatt in Omaha. So some of the teams that you coached with, Roons, I saw them there. And that kind of cemented to me that that I wanted to play at a program that I felt like could play in Omaha, right? I think that was always the dream. I think some of my teammates probably their dream was to play in the big leagues. I obviously wanted to play in the big leagues, but to me, like playing in Omaha was like the pinnacle of the because I still remember watching Mark Pryor, and we'd print out the draft sheet of like who had gotten drafted, and we'd like have the baseballs and hunt them down, right?
That's awesome.
And then on the Tuesday midweek games, so we normally go early, and then we'd catch the Tuesday games, and so you'd have like an elimination game early, and we'd always move down and can we rub your bat for good luck and that kind of stuff. So that was like I wanted to do that. So when I got into high school and was being recruited, I actually signed to junior college, and I was being recruited by some other schools too in the region. And that was the year that K-State went to their first regional, and it was just different. Like it was like K-State had always been trying to fight in baseball. And I think probably there was a pull too to stay home because, Bill Snyder had, built this incredible monster of a football program kind of out of the rubble, out of nothing. And I just thought it would be really special to stay home and be part of something that was bigger than myself. And so that's kind of how I ended up at K-State.
That's awesome. 2 follow-up questions. How far is it from Manhattan, Kansas to Omaha? Is that?
It takes about 3 hours.
Oh, nice.
So, you go up through like rural Northeast Kansas, and then you hit Beatrice, Nebraska, and grab yourself a Runza, and then you keep going. It's awesome. A great drive. It's really easy. It's a great drive.
And your family is from Manhattan, Kansas, or did you have parents that got jobs at KSU? Or
yeah, so my parents are from a small town. Both of them are from a small town in Northeast Kansas called Centralia, Kansas, and it's kind of claim to fame is it is the home of John Riggins. The former Pro Football Hall of Famer, I think. And so they both went to K-State. A lot of my family went to K-State. And so it was just a really cool 5 years of my life, having a lot of family that could come to games and watch. And, I think that was probably the most special part of my career was being able to play in the community I grew up in for the school that I had grown up watching, and then having the type of success that we did and being part of that on the field was pretty special.
That's awesome. And you touched on something, Blair, like this needs to be said too. I think Kansas State had never been to the NCAA baseball tournament until 2009. And so kind of like that group right before your guys' group, I remember, Rob Vaughn, now the coach at Alabama, was the catcher on that team. AJ Morris was a famous pitcher on the team. I think Nick Martini was a really good bat on that team. I actually saw those guys beat Mike Leake and Arizona State that year. And that was Cole Calhoun. That was Jason Kipnis. Saw that in surprise.
Yeah. I just remember, I remember that year going to games and just feeling like it was different. Like and Coach Hill was always a very offensive minded head coach, and Coach Sawyers was there, and he brought like kind of the same offensive mentality that Coach Clem and Coach Deggs and all those guys run, that Wolfpack mentality. And you could just feel it was just different. And it was something that at the time I wanted to be part of.
That's awesome. Kiv, go ahead.
Yeah, so my story is a little bit different. I grew up playing hockey, not much of a baseball player, and Clem would argue probably still wasn't much when I got there. But grew up just playing in the backyard in the summers because I was sick of the rink. And I went to St. Edward High School in Cleveland, Ohio. And that's when I started to really play. So my first year of high school, I did a hockey camp in Brockville, Canada. which is the province of Ontario, because it's outside of Toronto. And I got hit and I lost half my bicep. So I decided that this was probably not the sport for me. And when I got back to St. Ed's, the baseball coach was Danny Alley. So Stetson Alley was a high pick out of St. Ed's.
Yeah.
And Levisky was one of my best buddies, was a high pick for the then Indians in 2010. They're like, dude, you got to play on the baseball team. Well, I didn't make the varsity team like Blair did. So my first 2 years, I didn't like baseball, but what was keeping me going was the summer ball team I played on was a local team, not one of the, premier travel teams, but it's called Diamond Boys out of Akron, Ohio. And some of my best buddies are on there. So that kind of kept the fire going through hockey season, which ultimately led to the Cabo World Series, where Sean McCann, who put together the majority of that group, just to give him a little shout out, was there watching Shane Conlon because he was the superstar left-handed hitter out of Top Tier in Chicago, and we played each other. And since Conlon was already committed, I think McCann was just trying to verify the receipts. So he offered me a scholarship to come down, and I had never heard of Kansas State before in my life. It happened to be the same year that Michael Beasley was one and done there. So I'm going on a visit to the school. I don't know who Bill Snyder is, but he's coming back, and it's his first game back, and I'm on a visit, and I see Blair, and I'm like, okay. And then we move on to the next part.
He's like, I'm not sure about going there. But.
Yeah, I was like, man, they'll let anybody play here.
Yeah, right.
After that visit, Kansas State started to like pop up and everything that, Michael Beasley, and they make a run in the NCAA tournaments, like the Elite Eight, I think that year, Blair. And, Brad Hill was really good to me on the visit, and they didn't treat me like I was a hockey player playing baseball. They treated me like I was a baseball player. So I said, hey, this is the spot I feel the most love, and this is where I want to go. And my mom, whose parents were first generation, she did not want me to go 13 hours from home. And she also, I don't know, and I love her, I don't know if she knew where Manhattan, Kansas. Well, she definitely didn't know where Manhattan, Kansas was. She could probably point Kansas on a map, but it was too far away from home. And Mike Kivett ended up laying the wood on that one and saying, hey, he's going to go there because the conference is a little bit bigger than the other options. So that's what ended up, bringing me to Kansas State.
That is so cool. Kiv, where are your parents from? Like, where are they?
So my dad was Army. He was born in Southern Illinois. He bounced around Kentucky, Indiana, Northern Illinois, Michigan, and then ultimately in Ohio. My mom's parents and three of my uncles were born overseas. They came over to Maple Heights, Ohio, which is just a suburb outside of Cleveland. And that's where my parents met. So grew up in Cleveland the majority of their lives.
Awesome. And St. Ed's is like one of those big, like I think about that schools. Is there another one, St. Ignatius or something like that? Like these are big athletic powerhouse type of schools, correct?
Powerhouse. That's a great word for it.
Prep
Powerhouse. Yeah, no free ads, but man, that's a powerhouse.
That's awesome. Very cool. All right, boys, let's do this. So, and let's go. We're going to go in reverse order. So, Kiv, I'm going to come back to you. So, tell me your role on the 2013 team. And then also tell us like kind of where you were in your career at Kansas State, meaning like, hey, I was a junior and my freshman year, this is kind of how it played out my sophomore year. So kind of tell us about where you stood in the 2013 team and what your trajectory to get there was.
Sure. Yeah. My freshman year was a good group. Like you said, I mean, Evan Marshall was a big leaguer, Nick Martini, James Allen, Blair.
2011 was your freshman year.
Yeah, in 2011.
And that was the third straight regional for Kansas State at that point.
It was. Coach had it rolling, and it was a really good group. And this is kind of how green I was without knowing. Roons was. I didn't know how many there was a travel roster. I didn't know that, and I'm sure Clem. We talk about it. I'm sure there's some kids that don't know that still, but I had no clue. So the fall, I'm like saving the body. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to crush this boot camp and I'm going to make sure that I don't swing out of the zone. But like the bat speed's staying for the spring because that's where you get paid.
That's great.
And you don't necessarily make the team. I learned that too, because Andy Sawyers sat me down after my first fall and was like, hey, this group is really good. It's been to 2 regionals in a row. for the first time ever. And if you don't swing with bat speed, there's this place called Hutchinson, Kansas. And you're gonna and I was like, oh man, what does that mean?
That's awesome.
So Conlon, who was my roommate, calls me in. He's like, hey, that means they're going to send you to junior college if you don't play better. And I was like, okay, sure thing. But long story longer, that year was really, really successful. I didn't play the first 25 games of the year. I just sparingly at bats, maybe 10, 13 at bats. And then we were playing Creighton on a midweek, and I was going in there to bunt. And I popped up the first 2 bunts, foul, and slapped a patented 6-hole, like 7-11 shot for an RBI single because there's a runner at second and no outs. And Brad just kept putting me in there ever since. So my role my freshman year was just to contribute with a quality at bat and not mess it up on defense. But like I heard you guys chatting, you thought I was on mute, but I heard you, Blair. You guys were talking about, I was a little emotional and a little dramatic the freshman year, and got hurt late. So the regional, we faced Mark Appel, and it didn't go well, and really hurt with a high ankle sprain. So didn't get a chance, and that was really frustrating. So the next year, which would be 2012 season, we had just got through, let's say December, Blair, when we had coaching changes like crazy.
Yeah.
And Coach Chef came in, and it was successful. No, hold on. That was the freshman year when Coach Chef came in.
Yeah.
Then the following season, we didn't make a regional.
Right.
And we didn't play well.
Right.
And it was sophomore slump. And there was a lot of reasons why I didn't play good, Roons. And it was brought up to me from Clem, the first meeting I had with him. But I didn't play good. And all my older teammates, Blair got hurt. It was a year, right? It was one of those years. Getting worn out pretty good. And we finished, I want to say second last.
Last.
We last.
We
made the tournament.
I'm not great at remembering this, Mike, so just hang with me. This is
great. This is perfect.
All I remember to get to junior year, so 2013 was my junior season. I showed up, rest of the team shows up, and on the scoreboard was the rankings, or was Kansas State baseball last. So I should have remembered that, because for 50 mornings in a row, I remembered looking at that we were last.
So they had the standings from 2012 on the scoreboard.
Oh yeah,
and it stayed on. Yeah. If you were driving to Hy-Vee and you were just a normal person, you saw we were last.
Yeah,
it was amazing. Not the best for recruiting, I'm sure.
That is great.
Roons, a little background on that. That was my first fall, and Coach Hill is known for boot camps in the fall, and we would get the guys up early and run them a little bit or a lot. And we had a little ribbon board on the top of our scoreboard. And during our coaches meetings going into that fall, where they had finished in last place in the Big 12 the year before, he said, 24 hours a day, I want the Big 12 standings running across from 2012, running across the scoreboard. Doesn't matter if someone drives by the field at 2:00 in the morning, but for sure, when those guys show up at 6 a.m. to run, that's always going to be rolling across there.
That's awesome. Kiv, let me cap you there, because I want to have Clem. Clem I want you to kind of, okay, your first eyeballs. So let me do Blair first, and then Clem, when you go, like, think about, so you're meeting Kiv for the first time, fall of his junior year, and he's a guy that apparently made some noise as a freshman, had a sophomore slump. So Blair, you go first. Give us kind of where you were in your trajectory at Kansas State, and then Clem, you're going to fill in the blanks.
Yeah. So I came in the fall, my freshman year. Didn't really know. I mean, I knew I could hit a little bit, but I wasn't ready to catch. And I actually hit really well that fall. And then when we got into the year, I pinch hit in Charleston, South Carolina, and I had like a 9-pitch at bat, and then I hit a rope back up the middle. And I'm telling you, when I say it is the hottest I've ever been offensively, I mean it is the hottest I've ever been. I'd check swing, hit, I'd hit it on the barrel, hit. I mean, it was unbelievable.
A lot of those.
It was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. So through my freshman year, I was playing every day as a DH. And I remember I tell this story a lot to like young players. Like we were playing at Oklahoma and we did not put our statistics on the board at K-State. And I stepped into the box on Friday night and I can't remember who was pitching, but I looked up at the board and I was hitting like 380. And I was like, you know what? I'm a pretty good player. And I think from that point, I might have got like 3 hits the rest of the time. I mean, like it was unbelievable. And so I started really hot my freshman year. I ended up like the Texas A&M series was our last series of the year. I got replaced as the DH. They had tried to put me in left field, and I wasn't good enough to play there in college. I got burned a couple times, and they were like, "No, you can't do that anymore." And so like I went into the summer, like, and they had recruited, and we had a really good catcher that was a senior at the time. His name was Daniel De La Sega, and I wasn't going to start over him. But going into the next year, it was like, hey, all right, game on. Like your sophomore season, like. You got to go win the job behind the dish. There was another guy on our team named Chase Goskowski or
Graskowitz.
Graskowitz, not Goskowski.
Give the man some respect. He played Division I.
Yeah, sorry. Chase Graskowitz. And Chase was a switch hitting catcher. And like Coach Hill loved switch hitters. And so I knew I had to perform in the fall. And then we also had a guy come in named Dan Klein from Hutch JUCO that could like really rip it to second, right? So going into my sophomore year, I knew that like I had to really play well in the fall in order because we had a lot of guys coming back. Jason King was hurt my freshman year, and he was not hurt the second year.
He's an Ohioan too, right?
Yeah. Jared King, his brother, was coming in, who was committed to Tennessee, and then decommitted and came to K-State when Jason got hurt, so he could play with his brother. I mean, we were stacked with hitters going into the next year, my sophomore year. And I think fortunately for my career, I tore my labrum in the fall. And so, like, I redshirted that year. So they went to the regional. That's when they played Mark Appel. And that whole year, I just worked on, like, receiving because I felt like that was going to be the thing. Like, I needed to be a better catcher if I wanted to play Division I. I couldn't DH anymore. And so when I came back, my redshirt sophomore year was the year that we were last place. And I would either DH or catch with Dan Klein. And then towards the end of the year, I started catching more, and Dan was DHing more. And then so fast forward to our what would be, it was my redshirt junior year. We showed up, and like there was like we showed up, and I had kind of gotten some info from Justin Tadman. He was like, "Hey, dude, like." You better be ready when you come back. Like, I'm just telling you, like, I'm not one of those guys that can just show up and like, hey,
you were on the lake, dude. You were on the lake the whole summer.
No, like that's not me, right? So I was busting it. I'm in East Texas and I'm busting it before games. Like people are like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm telling you, when I go back to school, like it is gonna be like on. So I wanted to be ready. And I showed up, man, and we all showed up, and we walked into the first meeting, and it was like we had on our seats we had shorts and like a shirt and socks and running shoes and cleats, and like we all sat down. So like 3:00, and Coach Hill just like laid it all out. He's like, we took a step back. We're not going to take another step back. And at like 4:30, we all changed our clothes. And we walked out onto the turf and we ran 300-yard shuttles. And it was basically on from then. And he was like, nobody has we are ground zero. Like, and he was calling people out. He was like, Blair, I don't care how many like ABs you've had. Like, we are starting ground zero, like Jared King. And he went around the room. And like, I give Coach a lot of credit because he took a group of people that had some success in their careers. And he like, it's like that Bill Belichick type of stuff that like you reset, like Nick Saban, all the really, really good ones do that kind of stuff, and they reset their teams every year. It doesn't matter. And I think baseball, for some reason or another, I have felt like it kind of roll into the next year. It just feels like it kind of rolls. And so that leads us up to that junior year, that really special year. It was like we were ground zero in the fall.
That's awesome.
Roons, before Clem hooks this all up, because he's going to get us back on track here because he's the best at it. When Blair talks about all the catchers, you notice that he was bringing up all the catchers on the team. Yeah. Have you seen the Michael Jordan doc?
Yeah,
Blair used to just psych himself up like, oh, Dan Klein, he texted Ellen. He would make stuff up so that he would be prepared for practice. I'm not letting anybody talk to me like that. No, Dan's like the nicest guy. Never.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah,
nicest guy ever.
Yeah,
Blair's crushing him in his brain before.
Yeah.
That's great, Blair. Blair, that's what the Sanders kids are doing. Like Shadur Sanders talking about how Matt Rule, who's like the nicest human alive, was disrespecting his dad. It's like, what? Your dad doesn't even know who Matt Rule is. What are you talking
about? Right, exactly. I mean, he is not wrong. Like that was real. Like
I love that.
The competitiveness that comes out in those falls when
Oh, it's great. All right, Clem. So I want you to tell us where these guys were, like, as I can view it on the box score. Kiv hit leadoff, played second base. Blair, the box score I'm looking at, hit seventh and caught. But yeah, and it's your first year, Clem, and they've made 3 straight regionals and snapped that streak with a dead last finish in the Big 12. You come in, take it from here.
Yeah, so a couple things as I lay the groundwork for walking into the season. I don't know anything. I'm walking in there and I have a little bit of background knowledge and probably a little skewed thought of Kansas State, only because I was at Texas A&M the prior 3 years. And so at that time, A&M's in the Big 12 and K-State had always played us really tough. And we never felt like they should have. We're talking about, guys on our A&M team that are still playing baseball, here 12 years later, Michael Waka, Ross Stripling, Tyler Naquin, some really, really good players. And K-State would always play us really tough. And so I always had this innate respect for their program because they played really hard. And that's all a product of Brad Hill, like Blair talked about. They always played really hard. Were never scared, wouldn't back down, all of those things. So I was excited to be a part of that. These guys have also talked about the groundwork that was laid. And you're talking about some really quality coaches from, Sean McCann and Andy Sawyers, John Sheff, Rob Vaughn as the volunteer assistant, all names we've talked about through here. And so I'm walking in on the heels of that and feel pretty good about it. And I know from a roster standpoint, it's a bunch of, and this is completely biased because I grew up in the Midwest, but it's a bunch of Midwest kids that are older and that I've seen play quite a few games just because I competed against them. So I know there's a level of talent walking into that thing. And we got an older group, which in college baseball, old wins. And we certainly had that from a position player standpoint. And obviously that's who I'm working with. The other part of it, Roons, is, and it goes probably not thought of, our administration, and I may have some of these guys wrong and these guys can correct me. I was there less than 2 years. John Curry is our athletic director, who's now the athletic director at Wake, was at Tennessee, hired Tony at Tennessee, is a baseball guy, completely supportive of baseball. Chad Weiberg was there. He is now the athletic director at Oklahoma State, big baseball guy. Reed Sigmund, who probably gets underlooked in the whole thing, is probably all of these guys would say the brains behind the operation, who is also at Oklahoma State, but has been at Tennessee, was at Kansas State then. Laird Veach, who's the athletic director at Memphis. And then our sport administrator was Casey Scott, who's still at Kansas State. But you start, and I'm probably missing some people, but you start talking about those 5 guys in particular that are baseball people. And this is at a school with, like you talked about, very little baseball history. And so you walk into a situation where Coach Hill has built most of the history in that program and walk in there and have an older group with a great administration. I mean, a great baseball administration who are great administrators to this day at different places. And I felt oddly good about it. And it did not take very long. And these guys were poking fun at each other about the conditioning and all of that. And I mean, it was as hard to follow as I've ever been a part of. But it was, from a coaching standpoint, it did not take very long. It was a very short time into the fall to know. And again, from an offensive perspective, man, we got some guys. And so I felt pretty good about it early on. But there's still, when you're in a conference that runs north and south, and you're one of the few north, it's hard. You know, the league I'm in now basically runs east and west, and we're all kind of geographically on even footing. And in our sport, when you're in a Power 5 conference that runs north and south, you always probably wonder a little bit, and you better have guys with a chip on their shoulder that want to play really hard and, you know, use that, which you can tell by talking to these guys that they use that. Texas didn't want us, all of those kinds of things. So they would go into those series with a chip on their shoulder. And the beauty of that is, from a motivation standpoint as a coach, there wasn't a whole lot of motivate. I had to oftentimes point these guys in the right direction, maybe in life too. But from a playing standpoint, we never, as a coaching staff, had to light the fire to go play hard or any of that. So when that is the foundation of how it started, it makes the coaching part of it pretty easy. And you know, we've all been a part of teams where when it gets rolling, and I'm sure this is your coming questions, but when it gets rolling as a coach, you make out a lineup, you try to point them in the right direction, and you try to stay the heck out of their way. So, and we got to that point at some point in that season too. So, man, I felt pretty good about it early on, just because I had a baseline knowledge of the players, and then I started to interact with the players, and my coaching style is about relationships, and these guys know that, and spending as much time around each other, and or as much time as the NCAA will allow, and not a minute more, but we spent a lot of time in our indoor hitting facility together, especially the offensive players, and created a bond. And those guys would run through a wall for us. So it was pretty easy.
That's awesome. Back. Really cool. Hey, Kiv, so I'm going to come back to you. Go ahead, Blair.
So you were talking about like when you kind of knew. I remember in the fall sitting next to Brian Bobier, who was our trainer at the time. And Brian had like been at Texas, I think, a couple of times, had been in pro ball. And like, I didn't know, it was just like a normal K-State fall, right? Guys I'd played with. And he was like sitting in the corner, and I was getting ready to go out and catch or whatever. And he looks at me and he's like, "Hey, I think we're pretty good." And I was like, "Really? You think so?" He's like, yeah, like we're going to be pretty good, I think. Like, we might be one of the best teams in this league. And I was like, okay, dude. Like, yeah, right. Okay, whatever. Like, you know who's in this league? But he turned out to be right. It was, I always remember that when anybody talks about like what you're talking about, Clem. I remember that in the fall distinctly, like one conversation with Bobier where he was like, "Hey, I think we're going to be pretty good." I was like, "That's awesome." I mean, yeah, I think we're going to be pretty good too, but you know, yeah, I'm a player.
That's really cool.
So, anyway.
Hey, let me put a bow on the coaches. So, you know, Sean McCann is still on the staff at Tennessee, right?
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. Andy Sawyers is the head coach at Southeast Missouri State. Rob Vaughn, we mentioned, head coach at Alabama now. John Sheff, head coach at Virginia Tech. Yeah, you mentioned John Curry, Clem. That's amazing. So, Kiv, here's what I want to do next. So we're going to get to the Super Regional, but so don't pick that. Okay. So I want you to pick a moment or a memory from the actual 2013 season and describe it. So a moment or a memory from, and that could be anything all the way up until the Super Regional. A moment or a memory from the 2013 season, the actual season.
Oh, man. I mean, the easiest one is the wild pitch where Witt slides in and we go crazy, and there's the photo.
And what is that? Is that you guys clinched the regular season?
Yeah, that's when we clinched the regular season Big 12 title, and that day was awesome. But to be honest with you, I think Clem or Blair could do that one better. So I'm going to shocker Clem. I'm going to pick the best moment for me personally was at Texas, just because growing up, like, man, if I didn't know much about baseball, I wasn't a baseball guy really, but I knew Texas was good, and I knew Augie Garrido was like the dude. And I've seen all his videos, and YouTube's popular. He's got 1 billion hits on one of his videos, and we are tied, Clem, tied. Blair's at first, and there's 2 outs, and we're facing, I mean, one of Texas's.
Yeah, I think we were down 1 actually.
Yeah, it was down 1.
It was down 1. Yeah, we were down.
And I hit an 0-2 pitch into the corner, and that's not the storyline. The storyline is Blair scoring from first, and the amount of effort that Clem waving his arm, dislocating his shoulder, thinking that the faster he'd wave his arm, the faster Blair would run. And there's a sweet video of like sliding in the third because the play went to home, obviously, and seeing the entire bench out there, like with their hands on their head, Blair sliding in and Blair sliding in safe in his helmet, doing this and doing the safe sign.
Oh my gosh.
And Clem forgot that I was on third, and I was being an idiot and started to tiptoe down trying to score the another run just to be a hero for no reason, and almost got backpicked at third. And then he realized I was at third and started yelling at me to stay there. And that was probably the coolest moment personally for me that year, besides the Super
Which game
Bowl.
was that, Kid? Was that Friday,
That
Saturday,
was
Sunday?
Friday night against Texas. So
And you hooked it, or you pounded it in the right?
No, just slow pull the right. Got
I
it
love that.
super deep. And a big leaguer in right field, just bad angle. Mark Payton, shout out. Thanks for that.
Oh, Mark
And
Payton.
Yeah.
bad angle, let Blair score from first. And
Oh man,
I thought that was. I mean, I've never seen the Texas Stadium so quiet. And
That's awesome.
the next guy the next guy single up the middle. I think it was Witt, right? And
Yeah.
he was just Tanner Witt had probably 5 or 6 2-out RBIs that year that were enormous. That go, underneath the blanket or whatever. But that
awesome.
was a really cool moment, and I think that would probably be the one I picked besides the actual clinching of the championship.
Sweet. Blair, go ahead. What's one for you?
So we were playing. We played Texas Tech at home on a Friday night. And it was Firework Friday,
and we started selling beer that.
Yeah, we started selling beer that day. And like, I don't know if many people know this actually. I had a speech class. I can't remember if it was in the fall or the spring. And I had put a proposal together that I shared with Casey Scott. And my speech was about like why we needed to sell beer at K-State baseball. And I'd done all this research about all this kind of stuff. And I presented it to them. That's not why they did it. Obviously, they didn't do it because of student athletes.
Didn't hurt though.
Right. So we started selling beer. We had Firework Friday, and I think it might have been dollar hot dogs or something too that night. So anyway, they did what great Joni Smoller, who's the marketing person there, does what great marketing people do. They try to put good on good sometimes and blow it out, right? So we had Texas Tech coming in. We got great weather, and I was catching the pin to start the game, right? I was catching the pin with our starter before it. So I would always let him warm up, come down, catch the end of it, and then walk in with him. And I remember catching the last ball and looking to my left, and Kimball Avenue goes down, and the fans line up, and there were people all the way out to the football parking lot, all the way down the line. I was like, man, we're going to have a really good crowd tonight. I hope we don't play terrible, because it's a beautiful night. We got fireworks. All this stuff's lining up. We need to win this game, right? And we were still kind of not super hot yet. We might actually have been a couple games over 500. We didn't get super hot until later in the year. And I think John Davis or Fish, who hit the walk-off? Fish. So Austin Fisher, who's our shortstop, hit a walk-off that game. And I think Tanner Witt got thrown out in that game, actually. He's arguing a call at first base. And the place was packed. I don't know, we probably had – and, packed at Ole Miss is, 12,000 people. At K-State, packed is 3,000 to 4,000. But that's
probably amazing atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing. Everybody's super close. So, I think Tanner gets called out at first. He blows up, gets tossed. Everybody now it's just us against them and the umpires. And Fish comes through with a big knock to win it. We dog pile. Fireworks are going off afterwards. We're watching on the side. You couldn't paint it any better. And that was when I think about when we had our team reunion thing, I gave a speech, and what I think that if you were to make a movie of that year, that would be the kind of crescendo point that then they they'd go to this screen where they're counting up all the wins. That is the moment to me that really broke the dam, and we really started cruising.
That's awesome. Really cool. Clem, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, one of us has to take the Oklahoma series. So, we started that year 10-7. And so, I mean, we were pretty pedestrian, and to build off of what Blair said, we were just okay rolling through there till we figured out how good we were. The players did. Keep in mind, we finished the year 45-19. And so we started the year 10-7, and you start to do the math on that, and it's a pretty good run in there in conference play and all of that. We sweep Kansas, the second to last Big 12 series. And so we're going into the final series, which is a Thursday, Friday, Saturday series, because the Big 12 tournament's starting on the back end or early the next week. And because we swept Kansas, that the only team that could catch us, as I recall, was Oklahoma. Well, that's who we had. And so if we won a game against Oklahoma, we win the league outright. They had to sweep us to tie, but they would really kind of win it with the tiebreaker and all of that. And so I don't think it was until the bus ride from Lawrence to Manhattan, which is a short ride after sweeping them, that I'm kind of looking at my phone and kind of giving well, wait a minute here. Like, this is going to happen. Oklahoma at that time was coached by Sonny Galloway.
Jonathan Gray, was he the ace?
Gray is their number one. Dylan Overton is a left-hander that may have pitched
pick,
leagues, but like a high pick. And they're loaded. They're really good. And they're a fun team to play because of their coaching staff, because of their players. It didn't take a whole lot to get up for that. And so I believe it's a Thursday night game. And like Blair said, some of the neatest memories of that year is that in our first home series, whatever that would be in March, there are 14 people in the ballpark because it's 38 degrees and, sleeting, and you got, Blair's parents are always going to be there and a few other people. And Robert, the super fan, like you only got a few people there and a couple girlfriends. And then to think about 2.5 months later, and it's an 80-degree night, and we're trying to win the Big 12. And then keep in mind, football had won the Big 12 that previous fall. Basketball had won the Big 12 in the winter, and we're about to win the Big 12 for like two schools have done that in a power conference in like 25 years. It's just something crazy like that.
Yeah, Stanford and Texas.
And so here we are, like, this is going to happen. And like Blair said, we're hitting BP, and there are people just like in the tech series that Blair's talking about. There are people lined up everywhere, and there may have been 3,000 people there, and it felt like there were 120,000 people there because at our ballpark, everybody is on top of you. There are people where they're not supposed to be standing, people hanging over the outfield wall, the whole thing. And we beat Gray. And he's the second or third pick of the draft. And we walked them off that night. The place goes crazy. And then I recall the speech I gave in the locker room that fell on deaf ears after that game. And so in the coaching thought in my head, not to ramble on too much, is that we still have to win this. In my mind, we need to win this series so we can host. That's the best way to get to Omaha and all of that. Well, these guys, keep in mind, this is 10.5 years ago. And so these guys are 21 years old, freshly. And so I tell Coach Hill, I got this. I'm going to go in the locker room. And this is a little bit of, and I mean this completely complimentary, a renegade group. So I walk in the locker room, and this is after celebration, trophy, autographs, people on the field, Gatorade on Coach Hill, the whole thing. Guys, listen up. And they respected me enough to be quiet. And that's about where the respect ended. And I said, hey, listen, you guys, we need to win this series to host. And so you guys can drink as much beer as you want when we get back from Omaha in June. But tonight is not the night for that. Like, we need to win one more game here. Man, did that fall on deaf ears. So they came, may not have slept, came back the next day. The fortunate thing is they may have invited a few of Oklahoma's players to go with them. And we sleepwalk as much energy as was in the ballpark the night before. We sleepwalk through the next day and win like a lazy 4-3 game. And I probably celebrated as much after that game from a coaching standpoint, like looking at the RPI and all the stuff coaches do. But man, just a fun group. Most of my memories are off the field, and it sounds cheesy, and like in the batting cages, and all stories that these guys would sit here and love to listen to, but people listening to us would shut off the podcast at this point. So those were most of my memories, just because
That's great.
The people that were in our locker room, just a special, special group.
That's awesome. Clem, I'm going to have you start. So let's do the postseason because we'll run out of time in the postseason.
Yep.
So I'm going to give you guys my perspective on this. So, like Kansas State goes to 3 straight regionals. As a casual college baseball fan, it's like, okay, that's interesting. And then dead last, you're like, okay, that makes more sense. And then you guys have this incredible run, right? And it's a weird year in the league because Texas finishes dead last, and it's Augie Greedo, and you're trying to figure this out. But you guys win it definitively, 3 games, so you get to host. And there's always this thing about first-time hosts tend to struggle. And you guys, your regional is not like front and center nationally, but you kind of handle it. Like it's 3-0, and it looked very workmanlike. You beat Wichita State, Bryant, you beat Arkansas, and I didn't look at the scores ahead of this, but I didn't feel like anybody really like stressed you, or I didn't see any extra inning games in there unless I'm whiffing on it. But now you got to go to Oregon State, and Oregon State is, first of all, they won the national title in 2006 and 2007. It's Pat Casey. I would argue it's one of the greatest program building jobs in the history of college sports, that you could build a powerhouse in baseball in Corvallis, Oregon. No offense, Corvallis. And this team has star power too, right? Like Michael Conforto is about to be a first-round pick if he hadn't been already. Matt Boyd is still pitching in the big leagues. I mean, this is a real team, and they are beating you guys 2-1 in the 9th. And, you guys are up in the top of the 9th. And again, casual observer, paying attention to your super regional, but you're like, okay, this is over. But it wasn't over. And then now all of a sudden you guys are front and center because it's like, holy crap, what just happened? Like Oregon State was about to win game 1 on their way to Omaha, and now this is really weird. So, Clem, anything about the postseason, but what I want you to definitely add context to is it's 2-1 in the 9th. You're losing to Oregon State. It's a hellacious place to play. You almost feel like people are in your helmet. They're so, like, you guys, I know it's close to the field in Manhattan. There's no place on earth where the fans are closer. Like they're in the batter's box in Corvallis, basically. So take us through the end of that game 1. And you could do any other part of the postseason if you want, Clem, but I really want to nail the end of game 1 of that super.
Yeah, I'd much rather talk about the regional. People ask me all the time when we talk about that season, how long did it take you to get over the super regional loss? And my response is always the same. I'll let you know when I get over it. And it's just one of those things. So it is hard to talk about 10 years later for me, but game 1 is not as hard because we ended up winning that game in Roons. You remember 2013 is the height of the bad ball, bad bat era.
Yeah.
And so I think we led the country in batting average. Like we hit over 320 as a team, but I think we only hit like 30 home runs. And at K-State, when it warms up, it's a great place to hit home runs, but we have the worst bats in the history of college baseball, and maybe the worst balls in the history of college baseball. So, but we could really, really hit. And so we're going through that game, and we may be the only team in super regional history. We're on a chartered flight from Manhattan to, I think we flew into Eugene, whatever, doesn't matter. But Josh Reynolds, our pitching coach, who's now at Cincinnati, Coach Hill and myself are sitting at the front of the plane, and we don't know who we're going to start. Like game 1, we don't know who we're going to start. Like maybe the only team in super regional history that has like 3-hour flight and 2 hours and 48 minutes of it. We don't know who we're going to start. Joe Flattery starts and pitches the game of his life. What? Anyway, it's 2-1. Boyd starts for them and obviously a big leaguer. And I don't remember the out situation, but Kiv hits a triple into right center field and slides into third base, and we're still down 2-1. And if there is anyone that I have ever coached that loves the exact scenario you just spelled out, fans right on top of you, they do not like you just because you're in the other dugout. They're going to talk about your girlfriend or your mom or your sister or whatever. Kiv is going to talk back to them, and he's going to give it back. So he slides into third base. Mind you, we're down 2-1, and is like giving it to a guy over the third base dugout. Hey, Kiv, shut up. Big base hit by Witt up the middle. It's tied.
That was with 2 outs, by the way. There was 2 outs. Yeah.
It was.
2 strike hitting.
All of a sudden, and in your mind, it is one of those, I don't want to say you're reserved to losing by any stretch, but it's like, oh, we haven't done anything all game. And then it's a triple, and it's like, man, Witt, just bleed one in here. And he smokes the ball through the middle of the field, and it's tied. And it's like, holy cow. Well, then we put a 4 spot on him in the 10th, I think. And we end up winning that game 6-2. And then we're meeting out in right field, and we're at Kansas State, and like it's just one of those things where we're looking around and our players are like, oh, we're just going to do this. Like we're just, we're going to paint Omaha purple and all of that. And obviously it didn't work out. Michael Conforto's the best player on the field, and I think these guys would say the same thing. He hits a couple home runs in game 2. We have a freshman pitcher, Blake McFadden, going, who gives us everything he has. His body isn't right. And we get smoked in that game. We start our closer in game 3, and it's just an epic game that we have the winning run at the plate to end that thing and just didn't get it done. Yeah. And that was a tough one to swallow for sure. I'm still not over it.
Amazing. It was just amazing being a neutral observer in that whole thing, that it was just not on your radar. And then next thing you know, when you said, Clem, you guys are meeting in right field, I felt like that's kind of when America jumped into your super regional, because they're like, holy crap, like what? Anyway, hey, Blair, you and Kiv are going to go next. You go first, but feel free to talk about the regional, because I don't want to give that short shrift. I mean, obviously you hosted for the first time, and Kansas State still has only hosted one regional as far as I can remember.
Yeah. So we hosted the 2 seed was Arkansas, who was like the number 1 team in the country basically all year until they got kind of the second half of the SEC schedule, I think. They were really frustrated that they were not the host, right? So they're coming in and they're like ready to, kick the snot out of us. The 3 seed is Bryant, who at that time was, I think they had won 45 games or something. They were like really, really good, really, really good. Everybody was from up there, all that kind of stuff. And then the 4 seed was Wichita State. And Wichita State had won 40 games. I think every team in that regional, other than I think actually Arkansas, I'm not sure they were at 40 wins, but the Wichita State game really worried me because we had played them twice and we had never seen their starter. They're like ace. And that was, I think his name was Caleb Elam. And I think he was drafted in the first 5 rounds, but he was good. And Wichita State at that time, it was like at the tail end of Gene's career, but they had good players and guys that like had high ability. And I was a little nervous about like that game. I was like, I've been a K-State fan my whole life, right? Like that stuff happens to K-State, right? It happened in 1998. It happened in football in 2013. Like that stuff can happen, right? And so or 2012. So I think the first inning, we start a guy named Levi Mavoris, and he gives up a couple runs, and we come to the dugout, and I said a couple things, probably pretty fired up.
All right, I'll take over from here, and I'll fill in the gaps on this. Really good offense, freshman kid pitching, and he gives up a couple to Wichita State, and Blair is such a fan, but Wichita State ruins like every kid in the Midwest for my entire existence. You want to go, Casey Blake and Darren Dryford, like you want to go play at Wichita State, Gene Stevenson, the whole thing. Mavoris gives up a couple runs in the first and comes in and says something to the effect of, I got this, guys. We're all right. Blair grabs him by the shirt, pushes him against the back of the dugout and says, sit down. We got this. So that wasn't going to come out of his mouth.
Yeah.
You can keep going.
And then I think we scored 7 runs in the first inning. We just came back and just lit. And it's probably what needed to happen. Like looking back, like that's what needed to happen. We needed to have that happen in the first inning. So we just laid our ears back and just got after it. And all the nerves went out the window because we were like, here we go. We got to hit ourselves back into it. And I think we beat them by 20 something to 4. I can't remember. Roons, you probably know what it is. So then we were expecting to play Arkansas, and they have a guy that was playing on that team that's still a big leaguer. He's from Kansas City.
Stanek.
Right? What? Stanek.
Yeah.
Ryan Stanek, All-American, Friday night starter, like everything, like throwing 98 to 100, whatever. And they didn't pitch in the first game against Bryant because they were holding them for us, and they lost. And so we play Bryant. They play us really tight. We end up winning that game, and then we get Arkansas in game 3. And it was a tight game. The guy that they were throwing was really good. I don't remember who it was. It was just it was a battle, and I think we won we scored a leading run late in the game on another kind of like wild pitch kind of thing. Like they were like trying to pitch out, or they were trying to walk somebody and they threw it to the backstop, whatever. But like at that time, that year was kind of like just that special, you know. It just felt like it was kind of not going to be stopped. I'll touch like really quickly on the super regional, the thing that I think about the most. So the middle of the order against Oregon State, really the whole order, but like I was calling all the pitches. I really had a tough time calling pitches against Michael Conforto and Dylan Davis. Like those two guys, I felt like if I did not mix enough and pitch off and like nibble, like, I mean, if you leave like it didn't matter. Like he could be set up for a changeup, and if you left it above his knees, dude, he was hitting it over the right. I mean, I've never seen anything like that. I mean, he was incredible. That's why he's still playing in the big leagues. But there was a play that I think their shortstop made, or maybe Fish made. Somebody made a play up the middle in Game 3, and it was like a huge out. And it was one of those times where like you're in this moment, and it's like this surreal thing. You feel like you're kind of outside of your body's out of body experience kind of thing. And you're like, here are two groups. There's 18 guys that are playing this game right now, and they're playing the best baseball of their whole careers. Like, I mean, even the play that, I mean, nobody wants to bring it up, but the play that Conforto made to throw me out at home was an incredible play. Like the ball was underneath him, and like he knew that he couldn't like wait on it, so he dives and like traps it and stands up. And like he had thrown a ball almost out of the stadium on Friday in that same situation, and he like gets up and throws like a 95-mile-an-hour heater to throw me out at home, you know. And I think like that was just, I will always remember that my whole career, like my whole life, is like the feeling of that Game 3. It was like everybody was so locked in.
Yeah.
And like the zone was good. Like the guy wasn't bad behind the dish. And it was like everybody was just like, and I remember like I had an AB late in the game against Matt Boyd, and he had thrown a fastball and it was by me, and I was so nervous, and I fouled it like straight to the side. And I remember stepping out thinking like, this is like the pinnacle of your career. Like you've got to like take a breath and go have fun, right?
Roons, Boyd started Game 1 and relieved in Game 3.
Yeah. That's also when I knew, like, that's also when I knew we were in the big time, because like the dude had thrown like 7 innings a day ago, and like Pat Casey brings him back out because, like, you know, the dude's going to be a first rounder, right? And he's like bringing it back out for Game 3. We were in a heavyweight fight. It was pretty.
Yeah. That's the best way to describe. Like super regionals are heavyweight fights. They're just, it's like the best at their peak of their powers. Hey, Kiv, I want you to wrap with this. You can go wherever you want with this, but like I not to blow smoke up your TP, but I will. Like your personality from the outside, your personality, the confidence and swagger that you played with from the outside felt really important to this team. And then like, you guys are hosting a regional for the first time. Like that's a real thing. Like there's real data that would show us that teams that host their first regional can struggle with that. You know, like that's a lot. It's a very different experience. But I feel like not having been there, your kind of vibe, your energy helps prevent a team from capitulating to that. So I'm just curious your take, as you know, you're not a kid that grew up in Kansas. You didn't even know what Manhattan, Kansas was. But now you're the leadoff hitter and the Big 12 Player of the Year for this team that's going to be hosting a regional. Just any observations you have from that experience, or things that you thought that were important that you were going to bring to the party to help with that?
Man, I talked to Beery. My position coach at the time was Drew Beery, and he had played a ton of baseball in the minor leagues and was probably on the fast track to being a big league catcher, and blew out his thumb, or else, you know, he wasn't going to be our coach. And he was kind of, besides Clem, the guy that I went to the most. And there was nerves. I mean, before the regional more than the super regional, but everyone, whenever we get together, Roons, they always talk about all these stories and like they remember. And for me, I'm like, man, why do I not remember that? The only thing I really remember was Beery coming up to me before the regional and saying, hey, if you act different, this whole group's going to act different. So don't be, And I was like, yeah, he's right. Like, there's no reason for me to act any different or be nervous, because that's how it'll go down from a freshman starting a Friday night regional game, or guys that haven't won state championships that are playing in the biggest, event of the summer. And ever since he said that, it was kind of like an act as if moment. Like, hey, if you don't play good, you still have to yell at a fan, or you still have to argue with an umpire, or you still have to make Clem nuts and be on the top step. And if they think it's eyewash, that's okay, because it's their eyewash, right? Like, it's our group's eyewash. And I never felt after that moment like the moment was too big for any of us, and that was awesome. I think that was probably the biggest eye-opening thing from when we were in Omaha in 21 when I was with Tennessee. Like, same deal. That's kind of how I told Clem this, actually. Like, when we were on the charter flight, it didn't feel like the first time since 05 that they were going to Omaha. It just felt like another game. And when I walked into the clubhouse, and that was the old regional rules where you couldn't even have your clubhouse. It was crazy. So you walk in, you're getting changed. It's the same music, it's the same guys, the same people talking about last week's finals, and kites on Thursday with the specials, and it's the same deal. And
Kites is the bar, Coach Rooney.
No, it's a restaurant. It was a food deal.
For you guys, it was a bar thing.
It was a food deal.
God.
And I think that was probably when Beery brought that to my attention, was probably when I was like, hey man, if there's anything I need to do this weekend, it's be eyewash. And that sounds crazy, and it ended up working out. But
amazing.
I tricked it a lot, because that's when guys were starting to really go in our group, and I was starting to hit the plateau, and the bat speed was slow and got slower. And when you're facing Andrew Moore throwing downhill tilt at 94, and you're like, look at this guy. He looks like a kid from recess. And then it's 94, and it's like, that's down. They're like, no, it's literally down the middle. Like, ask the ESPN commentator. Alex Cora literally just told the people at home it's right down the middle. So I think that's one thing I remember, is that group was never overwhelmed. It was never too big for them. And honestly, this sounds nuts, and I'm sure every group that doesn't get to Omaha or loses in a regional or a tough super regional says the same thing. There was no doubt that we were going to go to Omaha. Like, I had never once felt, when Arkansas gets put into our regional and their staff's hooting and hollering about the turf and how they can't host because it's not big enough, and the whole 9 yards, and like reading the clips and the tweet, because Twitter's just starting to really roll now. Well, now it's X or whatever, but it never was bulletin board material, because our group was just like, this sounds crazy, but they didn't care. It was just, we were going to go to Omaha, and it doesn't matter who we play, because that's what we're supposed to do. That's what Coach Hill keeps telling us we're going to do. So we're going to do it. Like, it was programmed in us August 22nd when we got onto that turf at 108, and we ran those things until the sun went down. It was programmed that the task is this, and you need to complete the task. And I get emotional about it, just because I don't know how you talk about it, Clem. I hate it. And I've been to Omaha since. You've won a national title since. Blair's moved all across the world and has 2 kids, and like that. Anytime
you watch both of you in person coach in Omaha,
it's miserable. It's like, but at the same time, it's so awesome, because we get to jump on with you and tell ghost stories, and recognize some guys that are really successful husbands and brothers and businessmen, and they're killing it off that team. And a lot of it is because of what that makeup was, and their character is what pushed. We didn't have a culture issue. There was no changing of any culture. It was, we were going to come and do the task, and we loved being around each other, and it was awesome.
That's awesome. I will tell you guys that the D1 guys make fun of me for this, because I'm always a little, like, after the super regional weekend every year, I'm always a little melancholy. And, you're getting ready to go to Omaha, but like, I've been in that deal where it's like, you have this team of your lifetime that loses in a super regional. And you're right. Like, every year I'm heartbroken all over again. And I'm trying to like be my own therapist and be happy for the 8 teams that are advancing, but I'm still like crushed for the 8 teams that aren't. And it's just, but the conversation tonight is what makes the whole thing so great, right? Like, just the it's cliche, but the relationships really are the true gold. And we all want to win and go to Omaha. But thank you guys so much for doing this. This was incredible. I think we all need college sports therapy at times these days, because there's so many headlines about stuff that isn't fun. And I look at the three of you guys, I think about that team, how special it was, doing something that never been done before. I look at your three careers that are just, going so well. You guys are doing so many great things in your careers in college sports. And I just, I think many people will enjoy this conversation, but my heart is full. Like, this is so awesome. I was excited to do this, but you guys crushed it. This has been super, super cool. And again, mentioning all the names, like you said, Kiv, just absolutely incredible. So really appreciate you guys doing this. Really good.
Happy to do it.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thanks for having us and thinking of us.
Yeah, this is great. Really cool. Hey, let's wrap it there so we can keep it just over an hour. We will be back next week. Next week's guests are going to be TJ Bruce and Travis Jewett, who have really interesting backgrounds. They both have national championship rings. They have head coaching experience. They're back to being assistants, West Coast roots. So really fun to do that. The 10 Sunday nights, I can't wait for. Thanks again to our friends at Netting Pros. And that's it. Everyone have a great week, and we will catch you next time on the D1 Baseball Podcast.